Hello, hello everyone. I'm so excited to sew with you all today. I'm sure you are tuning in just so you can see how to piece together our awesome tile scene with our 4 blocks from our July Watch and Stitch. Now, a little bit about me. As Brooke, your educator here at Anita Goodesign, I do have some sewing expertise behind embroidery. So today I will be showing you how to piece together your tile scene. So as you can see, these are our 4 blocks. And what we're going to do is we're going to start with the top row to make things easier. So I'm going to go ahead and I will remove my 2 blocks, the bottom, and put those to the side. Now here are our 2 blocks, and this is the plan. What you need to do when you're piecing together your tile scene is you want to make sure that you're matching up any continuous motifs throughout your design. So you can see here that we have a little bit of a swirl, we have a metallic one, and we also have a navy blue one. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to align those motifs first so that they can have a continuous pattern throughout. So I'm going to go ahead and reposition my blocks, and I'm going to take that motif and I'm going to line it up as best as I can to the blue. We'll start with the blue one because it's a thicker satin stitch. So I'm going to go ahead and pin that portion in place. And then I want to go ahead and match my silver metallic one as well. Again, this is perfect when you're trying to create the your tile scene, as you want to make sure that your whole entire scene looks continuous. So now that I have my little motifs aligned, I'm going to go ahead and pin the rest of the side of my block, just like I would as if I'm stitching my blocks together normally for my quilts. So I'm going to go ahead and align my corners. And once I have my corners all pinned in place, I'm going to pin one of the side pieces for good measure. So I'm going to go ahead and throw in an extra pin here. Now, just as you would while stitching together your regular quilt blocks, we're going to go ahead and stitch right in between the tacking stitch line for your base fabric and the tacking stitch line for your batting. Once you have everything aligned the way you like it, you can try to look inside your block to make sure that they're aligned as best as you can. If not, no worries. I've been sewing a little alongside our seamstress Tammy, who is awesome, always giving me tips and tricks. And one of the best tips I have to offer is to never give up and to keep trying. And she's told me that many times before. So I'm going to go ahead and place my block in the machine. Like I said before, we're going to secure our block by running our straight stitch in between the tacking stitch for our batting and the tacking stitch for our base fabric. And somewhere along those lines, I'm going to make sure I'm removing my pins. That way we don't have any needle breaks. And you're also going to want to do a back stitch on your ends just to secure everything in place. I hope you all are having a wonderful day so far. As always, I love stitching with you guys, so I'm so happy when you all choose to tune in and join me. Now, as of right now, I'm just slowly removing my pins as I stitch in between the tacking stitch lines. And we're on our last corner. Okay, now we have our first top row complete. Let's pull it apart to see how we did. Oh, that couldn't have been any more perfect. I'm actually super excited about that one. Now, for moving on to the next part, normally when you're piecing together your tile scene, you're going to want to butterfly your seams. And what that means is you're going to want to take this seam here where you place your blocks together, and you're going to want to press it with an iron. Now, if you don't have an iron with you at this moment, like I don't, I'm just going to finger press my seam open. And this just helps create our quilt to make it less bulky and it'll keep it nice and flat. I honestly have to say I'm very excited about this. I could not have matched these up any better. So there you have our first row. Look how pretty that is. So much fun. Now we used a lot of fun techniques within this quilt block, including some fun metallic threads, as you have seen throughout our demonstrations with our educators. So now that we have our top row stitched together, let's go ahead and repeat the same for our bottom row. So now I have this fun little snowman here. And you can see that we use some felt throughout his scarf, along with some really pretty gunneled thread that I always find that I must discuss every single time I am doing any sort of video that involves gunneled thread, because I'm absolutely obsessed with it. So we're going to go ahead, and there's a couple things we need to align here. So because our scarf is such a giant piece within this tile scene, that is the first thing I'm going to align. And then you can see that we also have a little snow swirl. That's a tongue twister. And we will align that next. So why don't we do our big one first? So again, I'm just going to reposition my blocks like this. I have my pins, and I'm going to go ahead and align this little guy right here. Now the cool part about this is the satin stitching from the scarf kind of makes it a little bit easier. So I'm going to go ahead and align that section first. And then I'm going to align my top one. Just to make sure it's all nice and good to go. Hopefully we'll have a successful tile scene just like we did for the first one. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to align my swirls together as well. And again, this is just what you do when you have a tile scene. If you have a continuous motion like a scarf blowing in the wind or any sort of like snowstorm that's going about, you want to make sure that it looks continuous and complete. So we're going to start with our continuous motifs. And then once we have those in place, I like to head on over to my corners. Go ahead and pin those. Now I feel pretty confident about this one because we had two continuous motifs in different sections of our block. So I'm not going to pin this any further. So now that I have this, again, we're going to do just as we did to our top block. We are going to stitch straight down in between the tacking stitch for our base fabric and the tacking stitch for our batting. So let's head on over to the machine. And again, don't forget to back stitch on the top and bottom portions of your block. Just want to make sure everything stays nice and secure. We are almost done. And you may notice that I'm stitching a little bit slower when it comes to a tile scene. I just want to make sure that everything aligns perfectly so that we have no oopsies and we don't have to go back and seam rip those seams. So now that we have stitched all the way down our side, it's time to open it up. Let's see how I did. Oh, it's perfect. It's literally so perfect. All right, so just as you would with your top block, we're going to go ahead and we're going to finger press our seams. Now again, I love a good steam iron. It just makes everything super nice and flat. The reason why you want to butterfly these seams like we do is to make sure that you reduce bulk within your quilt and it will lay perfectly flat for you. So for this demonstration, I am going to finger press my seams. And again, I am super happy with how this turned out. It just looks so beautiful and it aligned perfectly. So now that I have my two top rows complete, you are going to stitch your top row onto your bottom row. Now the nice part about this is you don't have to align anything with this tile scene in particular. So now that we have our free motion motifs all intact, we can go ahead and stitch our top row onto our bottom row, just like we normally would for our quilt blocks. So for this, I'm going to lay it right on top. I'm going to move this up so you have good, so you can see how I'm doing, have a good view. Now, this is where I'm going to start. These are my center seams, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to align those. Again, we want to make sure that our blocks are lining up. This is where that 1/2 inch seam allowance comes in handy. We aim to have a 1/2 inch seam allowance for all of our quilt blocks so that it aligns perfectly and there's no guessing when it comes to our tacking stitch. So now that we have that, I'm going to go ahead and pin all the way down. And I may even hop on over to this corner just to make sure my corners are perfect. And I'll head down to this corner. And for this one, I will pin a couple times through just to make sure that everything is aligned correctly. Now that we're all pinned in place, let's head on over to the sewing machine. And we're almost there in completing our tile scene. So again, don't forget to stitch a little bit and then back stitch to make sure everything stays in place while removing those fancy pins to make sure we have no little machine incidents here. I'm going to continue stitching all the way down in between the tacking stitch line of my base fabric and the tacking stitch line for my batting. This is adjoining the 2 rows. And again, you may see me stitching a little bit slower. I do want to ensure that everything is aligned perfectly. That way I don't have to go back. And here you can see as well as I continue to sew that our butterfly seams are so important because you want to make sure that you're reducing any of that bulk. So you want to make sure those are flat before you continue to go over them. We're almost done. Now again, we are getting to the bottom corner. Don't forget to backstitch. All right, and now we have our tile scene. See how easy that was? Nice and easy breezy. We're gonna go ahead and finger press this seam open. Again, if I had a steam iron, that would be amazing. But for this one, we are just going to finger press our seams. As another added tip and trick, I have seen our seamstress do this before. If you are looking to reduce bulk within your quilt, you can also trim around the excess seam allowance that you have here in the center point. For this one, I'm going to leave it as is, but just as a reminder, that is a possibility if you choose so. So I'm going to flip this over so you can have a really nice look at what our tile scene looks like. You can see that our seams are looking perfect. Our free motion is looking perfect. So now we will move on to our back fabric. Now the back fabric can be any choice, any color choice that you desire. For this one, I'm keeping everything the same color. So let's go ahead and lay our back fabric down. Now, as another added tip and trick that I've also seen our seamstress do as well, if you would like to, you can use what we use is a 505 temporary spray adhesive. Now, you may have seen us use these in videos or throughout tutorials. If you would like to spray some of this temporary adhesive on the back of your design, you are also welcome to do that as well, as it'll help you keep it in place if desired. If not, your pins will work perfectly. That's just an added bonus or a little tip and trick that we use here at Anita. So I'm going to go ahead and try to lay this as flat as possible, even though I do not have a steamed iron handy. So I'm going to start by aligning the corner, and I will pin all the way around my block. Now here you're really going to want to make sure that everything is secure. Again, those seams, they're nice, they're pressed, and they are pinned in place. Okay. Now continue this process on all 4 sides. Again, I hope you all are having a wonderful day. I hope it's nice and sunny wherever you are. And as always, thank you for tuning in with me. I love stitching with all of you. So again, this is always so much fun. And it's kind of unique as you get to see another side of my sewing skills. Okay. Now, as you can see, aligning my base fabric with this design is a little bit more difficult as my seams are not pressed. So it's always nice to have that iron ready to go when you're quilting. Now, once we have this all pinned in place, you will then stitch your 4 blocks in the ditch. Oop, I'm getting caught on my shirt here. And I like to pin this as much as possible just to make sure that everything stays in place. Again, we often use a temporary spray adhesive. This is kind of a smaller tile scene, so I'm not too worried about using my temporary adhesive. But if you would like to, the option is yours. So now that we are all pinned, I'll pin up here one more just for good measure. So once you have your quilt all pinned in place, now it is time for the fun part. We will now be stitching in the ditch, which means you will now stitch in between all of your blocks. So follow that seam with your sewing machine. Now this is another part where you might want to go slower to make sure that you are staying right in between that seam. For this project, I am using the same color thread as my base fabric. This will also help hide the thread, so you may want to match that to your base fabric color. I will also be matching my thread to my base fabric. So to make things much easier, I have made my bobbin the same color as the top thread for this project. So let's go ahead and head over to our machine. Something that always helps me along the way is bringing my needle down straight into the seam before I drop my presser foot, as this will definitely help me in the long run. Now, since we will be using bias tape to complete this design, I will not be stitching. I will not be back stitching when stitching in the ditch. So now that I'm down one side, I will repeat this on the other side. All right. So now that we have that all stitched, I'm sorry I did not talk along the way. I definitely like to concentrate a little bit more when I am stitching in the ditch. So now we have that all set and ready to go. We can go ahead and get ready for our binding. Now, if you would like to, you can also stitch around the outside of your design if you would prefer to try to keep that in place. It is not necessary or mandatory. I just like to pin and make sure that everything is pinned all the way around my design to ensure that there's no movement when I'm stitching in the ditch. You want that back fabric to be nice and flat. So now I'm going to go ahead and remove my pins because we will be pinning our binding. Now for our binding, we use a 2-inch width, and the length is determined on how big your project is. So I've just cut a few strips here using the 2-inch in width, and let's go ahead and grab a couple of those. So if you have plenty of fabric, you might be able to trim your binding all in one strip, but for this, we actually have to make a longer strip of batting. So for binding. So for that, we're going to go ahead and take a couple pieces of our strips, and we are going to stitch these pieces together. So you're going to go ahead and align your fabric right on the edges, and we're going to go ahead and stitch. You can stitch at whatever seam allowance you desire for this one. I'm just going to use probably about 1/4 of an inch, and that will help lengthen our binding. All right, I think we may be good to go, but if we needed an extra one for this, we can go ahead and add one as we continue. But I think we may be okay with just 2. Again, if you're looking for the length of your project, you're just going to measure around the complete outside of your quilt. So to begin this process, this is where a steam iron does come in handy again, just because I like my binding to be a little bit more crisp. We are going to go ahead, we're going to lay the corner on the table here, and we are going to fold the corner down to create almost like a triangle. So your binding is going to look just like this. Now, because I don't have an iron to press, I will just keep the shape with a pin. That way you can see how we are doing it here. So I will leave a pin in this just so you can see the shape. Again, you're just going to take the corner and you're just going to fold it right down and align the edge with the bottom of your binding. All right, so I'm going to start down here, and I'm going to go ahead and align my binding just along the bottom edge. Now you can start as close or as far away from the corner as you would like, but we are just going to start just over the halfway point of this side of the design. We are going to pin in place. Now, in order to make that perfect mitered corner, you're going to want to stitch. You're going to want to stitch all the way down, starting at this corner, this top corner of your folded triangle. You're going to want to start using the 1/2 inch seam allowance. You're going to want to start all the way up here. You're going to stitch all the way across, again, following that tacking stitch line, using that 1/2 inch seam allowance. Once you hit the corner of your block, you are going to put your needle down. You're going to lift your foot up, and you are going to pivot. And I will show you exactly how you need to do that, but you're going to pivot at that corner, and you're going to follow down to the other corner using it at a 45-degree angle. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this pin just so we don't, well, I'll put it up here. That way everything stays intact and you can see. So again, we're going to start here at the bend of our triangle. We're going to straight stitch all the way down until we hit that corner marking of the tacking stitch. As you can see, I'll just put my finger right here. You are going to go until you hit that corner, then you're going to put your needle down, lift your foot up, and you're going to pivot and stitch using a 45-degree angle. So let's do this together. And again, if you want to pin or leave your pins in for the time being, you can do that. For your base fabric, I chose to remove mine. I just thought it'd be easier along the way. So we're going to go ahead, put our presser foot down, make sure we're near our tacking stitch. Okay. You can go ahead and stitch. I always like to secure my stitches with a back stitch when I start and when I stop. So just add that in there. And now we will be stitching at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Again, I'm going to go slow just so you can see how I'm doing this. And that way it'll be easier to understand once I get to that corner. Now, sometimes, as a little tip and trick that I'll add in here, I like to notate where my corner is, where my tacking stitches meet. And once I know where that is, I will often place a little pin in there as well, so that I know where I want my pivot point to be. All right. So now that I'm in there, I've reached my pivot point, my needle is down, I'm going to lift the presser foot, I'm going to pivot my design so that I will go 45 degrees angle off the corner, lower the presser foot, and go ahead and stitch. Okay. And I will bring it down here to show you. Now, for this demonstration, I probably should have used a brighter color so that you might be able to see it better, but I will trace along with my fingers so that you can see. Again, we started here at the triangle fold. We went using a 1/2 inch seam allowance to match our tacking stitch line. We did a straight stitch all the way down until we hit that corner where our tacking stitches meet. Once we hit there, we kept the needle down, lifted the presser foot, pivoted our design, put the presser foot down, and stitched using a 45-degree angle. So again, with my finger all the way across, pause, pivot, and 45. So now that we have that, we still have to complete that mitered corner. So I'm going to just put these over here for a second. I'm going to pivot my design so it's a little bit easier to fold. Now what you're going to do is fold your binding back onto itself. So we're going to take our binding and we're going to line our edge up just like so. So you're going to want to take that edge and line it directly up with your seam allowance and the binding that you had just sewn. So I'm going to go ahead and do that one more time. I'm going to take my fabric, pinch it, and I'm going to fold it in alongside that edge. So if I were to pull it back, you would see almost like this beautiful corner here. So again, I'll do it one more time. I'm going to pinch it. You can even start along the seam allowance if that helps. You can pinch it and align it. Just slowly turn until it aligns to that edge. And now we will pin it in place. I used to be super scared about mitered corners until I kept on sewing with Tammy. She's a great seamstress here at Anita Goodesign, and she's taught me many things. I have been known to be able to sew apparel and not so much quilts, but now that I have learned a lot from Tammy, I feel much more comfortable when it comes to sewing my quilts. So what we're going to do is we're going to finish pinning all the way down this edge. And I'll show you with my finger again what we plan on doing. So I'm going to leave this down. I'm going to leave this unpinned because I want to show you the process. So once we have that folded in along our edge, we are going to start from where our pin is. Right here, we are going to straight stitch all the way down. And as soon as we hit that corner tacking stitch where both tacking stitch lines meet, that's where we're going to do the same thing we did before, and we are going to pivot at a 45-degree angle. So for this time, you're starting at the edge of your bias tape. You're going to start at the edge. You're going to straight stitch all the way down until you meet that corner piece, which I'll pull back here. This is a good representation of our little corner. And again, as a little tip and trick, something that I kind of find helpful for myself, I like to find that corner and I like to put a pin there just so I know when a good pivot point is, because you want to make sure that you're hitting that corner to ensure that your mitered corners look very neat. So here we have it. Again, as I tilt it towards me this way, we are going to stitch straight down. So I'm going to go ahead and place that in my machine. Again, we are using our 1/2 inch seam allowance. Make sure I get my pin out. And now we can stitch down until we hit that corner. And once we hit that corner, again, I will stop to ensure that we know what's going on. I'm going to do a little back stitching here as well. I hope you are all enjoying this little tutorial on how to piece together your tile scene, as well as backing and binding your project. Again, for these ones, I do apologize that I go a little bit slower on these. I tend to want to make sure that it's perfect, so I like to kind of go a little bit slower just to ensure that everything looks nice and neat. Now we are almost to our pivot point. So again, once we hit that point, we're going to stop. I'll remove my pin. My needle is already down, so I'm going to go ahead, raise my presser foot. I'm going to pivot my design, lower my presser foot, and finish off at a 45-degree angle. Now that we have stitched all the way down, I'm just going to do this one more time because I know how it can be when you are learning how to back and bind. I want to make sure that everything seems nice and easy as possible for you and that you feel comfortable doing it. So again, I'm going to start down here. As we did before, we have that fold. We started from the edge of our design. We did a straight stitch using a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way down. We marked our pivot point and did our 45-degree angle. Now the cool part about this is you're going to continue this on all 4 corners. So we're going to go back this way. I'm going to lay my fabric here. Like I said before, something that helps me is to make sure that I'm pinching right at the seam allowance. It kind of just creates that nice little guide for me. So then once I am over here just like this, you're going to align that bias edge with your other bias edge. And I am going to pin in place. and you're going to repeat the process. And again, I am going to make sure that I am placing my pin right on the corner, just so I know where I'm going. And this time you may have noticed I pinned a little less, so just pin as much as you need to. Again, we are going to go ahead and pin straight all the way down, and we're going to start at our edge for our sewing. Again, we're using a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and go ahead and stitch. I think we can speed this one up a little bit. Okay, we've reached the pivot point, needle is down, pin is out. We're going to lift that presser foot. We're going to pivot so we can go at a 45-degree angle, lower our presser foot, and stitch. All right, and now we're going to repeat that process again. So we're going to go ahead, make sure you can see it's all nice and good. We're going to go ahead and pinch near the seam allowance. We're going to line our binding up against the edge and pin in place. And we're going to have the perfect amount of binding too, which is super exciting. So we can go ahead and mark that corner just like we did before, so we have a good pivot point. And there we have it. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to start doing a straight stitch on the edge where both of our bindings align, and stitch. Okay, we are just about to our turning point for our last corner. Okay, again, one last time. Needle is down, lift your presser foot, pin, lift your presser foot, pivot, lower your presser foot, and stitch. Okay. And for our last corner, we will repeat that process where we lay our design flat, pinch near the seam allowance, fold it back, and pin in place. So now to finish this off, we will be doing the same thing that we've done before. We're going to start at this lined edge, and I'm just going to go roughly about 3 inches past my triangle fold. So I'm just going to go ahead and pin that where I think sees fit. And you are welcome to trim the rest of your binding off at that point. So let's go ahead and use these scissors. Trim the rest of your binding off. And go ahead and sew. Okay, now we can go ahead and remove this from the machine, and our binding is stitched all the way around. Now we will do the next and very last part is the flipping of the binding. So you can go ahead and remove your pins. And we'll start at this corner over here. You can see as we begin to flip it. Actually, no, let's do this one. As we begin to flip it, look how nice that mitered corner is. That's a nice corner. Now I chose to do this one instead of the other one because my bias tape ended on that corner. That's all right though. We're going to go ahead and turn our design right side facing down. So once you have your corner flipped, just like I have here, you're going to go ahead and pull your binding nice and taut. And you're going to fold your binding edge in and align it with your tacking stitch. And then once you have that all set, you can go ahead and pin it in place. So again, we're going to pull our binding nice and taut. We're going to fold that edge in just enough so that it can align perfectly with our tacking stitch. And you're going to complete that all the way around the entire design. Now I can start here by showing you how to do a corner, just so you can see what that looks like. Oops, pin that one a little upside down. So what you're going to want to do for your corner is you're going to want to fold it as best you can so that your binding is nice and straight. And then you're going to go ahead and turn your design like this. And you're going to repeat that process on the other side so that it makes this nice corner. And again, this might be tricky at first if you're new to backing and binding, but no worries. As I said in the beginning of this video, Tammy gave me some of the best advice I could be given while learning how to stitch together some quilts, and that is to never give up. So I'm going to continue doing this all the way around. Just pull it nice and taut and align with your tacking stitches. This is looking really good. Mitered corners look really nice. So now I'm back to another corner. You can see that I just flipped it. So on the front, it looks like this. And when you lay it right side facing down, you can go ahead and flip that towards you. And we're going to just pull it nice and taut. And again, this is how we will do our corner. So we're going to go ahead, pull this side only so that it matches our tacking stitch line. Keep it nice and straight. And then once you get to this side, we will turn this way. Oops, forgot I had this one pinned. We'll go ahead and flip this. And since we've already done the straight edge of this corner, we're going to go ahead and do the straight edge of here. And you can see as you have done before, as you've stitched from the beginning, we have a nice fine edge. We're going to go ahead and do the same thing, and it just creates that beautiful corner. Now you can see some of my binding is coming up, so you may have to stitch it in multiple spots or pin it in multiple spots. I'm just trying to pin this a little bit quicker for you guys. Okay, we are cruising. So again, for our corner, we're going to go ahead and focus on the straight edge first. And as I continue to learn more about backing and binding, if you have any backing and binding tips and tricks as well, I would love to hear what you all have or what you can share with me so I can become better at backing and binding. This is looking really good. So again, once we have that corner all nice and straight, we're going to go ahead and flip our design, and we're going to repeat that process by creating that straight edge and folding in our corner. This one's a little tricky. All right, and we almost have all 4 sides pinned in place, which means we are so close to being finished. As you can see, some of my binding is unraveling, so you may need to add extra pins in yours more than I am placing in mine. I suggest doing as many as makes you feel comfortable. If you feel like you can adjust it along the way, you can go ahead and do so. I would definitely need some more pins in this project. Okay, we're at our corner. Go ahead and turn. And we're on our last one. Oh, I guess I need some more pins. Again, I hope this tutorial has been super helpful for you today as we back and bind our tile scene. Cool. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a quick look around my project just to make sure I don't have any odd ends poking out. There are some spots I'm not 100% comfortable with, which means I'm going to go ahead and pin those just to make sure that my project is just how I like. And our last step in the process will be to stitch in the ditch all the way around our design. Well, it's kind of like stitching in the ditch, but it's finding that little corner. I like to call it stitching in the ditch because it is just like the ditch of our seams. It is the place between the binding and your block. So I just have a few more spots I want to secure, and then we're just going to finish off by stitching all the way around. Now again, you can kind of see where a iron comes in handy. If you would like to press your binding as you go, that is another thing that I also like to do as well, just so it makes my binding nice and flat along with my butterflying my seams. Now I have all of my spots pinned in place, especially the ones that I was a little bit iffy about. I just want to bring you down to take a look at my back of my tile seam. So you can kind of see here a little bit in the camera that there is some bulk, and this is why pressing your seams is so important. If you have a steam iron, this will reduce the bulk in the back of your quilt. So now that I have this all set and ready to go, I'm going to go ahead and flip my design over. And like I said before, we are just going to stitch following the line in between our binding and our quilt block. Now you can do this from either side. Sometimes I find comfort, and this might just be a tip and trick on my portion. Sometimes I find comfort in stitching from the back of my design, as I like that edge to look all nice and neat. And I also trust myself that I pulled my binding nice and taut so I won't have to worry about it. For the sake of this video, I will go from the front of the design and we can see how well we did on the back. Okay. All right. Now again, I might go slow on this round just because we have so many pins, and it's so important to make sure that you are not running over your pins with your sewing machine. So again, we are stitching right in that ditch that we have there. I'm going to drop my needle. Dropping my needle always helps me so I can make sure that I'm in the correct position and that I'm not forcing myself on top of the binding or the bias tape of the fabric. So we can go ahead and lower that presser foot. And I'm going to stitch very slow just so I can make sure that I'm removing my pins. Bring this over here. And if you want to double check as you go, you can also do that as well. If you stitch a little bit, you can stop and flip your edge over just to make sure you are securing everything. And if you are not, you can always come back to it. Now, once you hit that corner, you're going to want to pause. You're going to want to leave your needle down, lift your presser foot up, and pivot. And again, we're leaving our needle down and we're pivoting our presser foot and stitching. Ooh. I'm going to slow this down just a bit. Now we are almost on to our last side. If you have stayed here with me this entire time, I truly appreciate it. And I hope you've learned a lot along the way. I know this is may have been a little bit longer video than most, but I'm hoping it'll be very inspirational and informational for you. So again, we're going to go ahead, we're going to hit that corner. And we're going to lift our presser foot and pivot. And stitch down our last side. And now we are all done with our tile scene. I mean, look how beautiful that is. So that's just how you would back and bind and piece together your tile scene. Again, I hope you had so much fun. If you are still here, I really appreciate you staying along for the ride. I hope this was informational for you all, and I'll see you next time. Have a great day.